Welcome to Fairfield Public Access Television. I'm Susan Kessel.
And I'm Mark Schafer.
And we're here today to bid a fond farewell, a hard, fond farewell to the Barhydt Chapel, which is on the old Parsons campus. It seems like as I get older, more and more I'm having to say goodbye to things, people, places that you don't always want to, but time changes. And
yeah, and we're not even old yet.
Right.
Not really.
Right. So time changes and marches on, and we wanted to share with you a special historical walkthrough of the Barhydt Chapel. Mark is with historical groups. I'm going to let you tell.
Yeah, I'm chairman of the County Historic Preservation Commission. It's a commission appointed by the county, so we're basically an arm of county government. Officially, we're called a certified local government. I mean, that makes absolutely no sense to anybody. But if you say you're the Preservation Commission, that makes more sense. And I don't know why they don't call it that in the first place, but we're not here to discuss that. So anyway, yeah, basically we're going to focus a little bit on the history of the building, its context. My mouth is cold. This is March, and it's windy out here. Anyway, we'll discuss the building in the context of the other buildings that are now gone from the Parsons campus, and some dates that are pertinent to the building itself. I'll recap some of the things that were shared at one of our Parsons Reminiscences programs at the Carnegie Historical Museum, I guess last month. I'm also on that board, by the way. And then we'll talk about architectural features and the things that make this building distinctly Gothic and Midwestern.
Okay. Is there anything right outside where we're standing that we could identify or talk about?
Yes, we're standing right now in a Gothic archway. I think it's Gothic. It's just the pointed panels behind us on the doors are a little more truly Gothic. The arch above us, if memory serves, and I'm not going to get out in the wind to find out for sure, but I think is a little flatter, which is kind of a Tudor arch. And it's still pointed, but it's a little flatter. It's relative to the reign of Henry VIII, who was of the Tudor lineage in England. A good example of Tudor revival architecture would be the Methodist Church downtown across from the courthouse. It has the flatter Tudor-style arch and dates from about 10 years after this building. And then on either side of the archway here are bronze memorial plaques that tell us that this building was given by Theodore Barhydt, who lived in Burlington. And then the plaque on our left, I believe, specifies that it was given in memory of his mother, Phoebe, and his father, Nicholas. And we'll see their names on plaques inside a little later when we get the tour of the building. But the building is a Gothic style. I think the newspaper's been calling it late Gothic. You could also hear it referred to, I think, as English Country Gothic, because it's very typical of the little churches that you see in the countryside in England, because it's very simple. When we think of the classic Gothic architecture, it's very ornate, like Chartres Cathedral or Notre Dame in Paris and places like that, or St. John the Divine in New York City. This is a much more simplified version, but it's Gothic in that it has the pointed windows, like I mentioned earlier, and then it has a cruciform floor plan, which means the floor plan is in the shape of a Latin cross as opposed to a Greek cross. A Greek cross has the four arms of equal length. The Latin cross has the long stem with the shorter arms and top.
I never knew that.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
And I'm just getting started. No,
okay, that's
I don't
great.
have much more to say.
You know so much about this. You're just the perfect person, and I know this is difficult for you because you are historical preservationist. But as we say, things change, and
this is only the second time I've seen the chapel since Parsons Hall was torn down a year ago. Whenever we drive north of town, I always have my wife drive, and I just look the other way. And I finally thought, okay, it's time. So, I don't think I could have done it 6 months ago, but a couple weeks ago I looked.
And so this is also a healing process, and
yeah.
I think this is wonderful and says a lot about you, Mark, to be able to come out here and do this. So thank you for sharing, and this will be a treasure to keep this video for people in Fairfield. So as we go inside, I think maybe our cameraman will take a break and follow us in.
I think maybe our cameraman would like to get out of the wind. We're relatively toasty here in this
In
little
the
alcove.
sun.
Yeah.
All right, let's go in.
Okay.
Mark, we are standing in Barhydt, and you said we're standing where?
We're standing in the crossing. This is where the nave, the main aisle of the church, and the transept, the cross piece of the Latin cross, intersect.
Okay.
And behind us is the apse, A-P-S-C. No, excuse me, A-P-S-E. That's the rounded end, the top end of the cruciform plan.
Okay. Well, you can see that this is a beautiful chapel in its day, but it does show a lot of deterioration and
Especially on the tower end of the building, you have a lot of deterioration in the plaster where moisture is leaked in. Let's see, other architectural features are what you call the Clerestory. That's the row of short windows above those two side aisles. We also have reinforcing cross like tie rods that keep the walls from pushing out from the weight of the roof, and they have a decorative shield in the center called an escutcheon. And of course on either end of the transept, on the arms of the transept, are the stained glass windows that somebody mentioned at one of our museum programs that they were not original to the chapel, that they were added a few years later, although they're still in memory of Parsons family members. I have my cheat sheet here. The window on the south is in reference to the story of the rich young ruler, who he asked Jesus what he can do to enter the kingdom of heaven, and he says, well, did you follow the commandments? Oh yeah, I did all that. And then Jesus says, then sell all you have and give to the poor. And of course the rich young man couldn't handle that and walked away in sorrow because he just couldn't let go of his wealth. And that's in Mark chapter 10. I looked that up. I wasn't sure of the reference. So that's a real beautiful window. And the name of the window maker, when we look at it later, is on there in a little panel. Then the other window on the north side, and I had never heard of the title before. It's called the Crown of Righteousness. It was just always the window with the two angels, but they're holding up a laurel wreath, kind of like a victor's crown. And the scriptural reference below it is from St. Paul, where he says, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the course. And so, of course, the laurel wreath in ancient times was the crown of victory given to an athlete who wins a competition.
Okay, and we will take a look at those closer when we walk around. Tell me again, when was the church built?
Let me look. 1908.
1908.
Mm-hmm. And originally, I guess, Theodore Barhydt was from Burlington. Originally, I think he wanted to endow the library, but Andrew Carnegie did that, ahead of schedule in 1906 and 1907 when the Carnegie building was built, and so Barhydt shifted gears and gave money to build the chapel in memory of I'd always heard in memory of his mother, but the plaque outside references both of his parents. So we can always learn things, I guess. I made like kind of a rundown of the other buildings that were on campus. This building is part of what was called the Henry K. Holsman National Historic District. Henry K. Holsman was the architect that designed this building and some of the others on campus. And it was designated in 1983. Predating this building by a long shot is the mansion. Originally it was a home built by Bernard Henn, Henn, in the 1850s, who was a U.S. congressman, and that's what's called the Henn Mansion now. But in the early days of Parsons, it was called the Mansion, and is where the president lived after Ankeny Hall was built in the 1870s. In 1901, Ballard Hall was built, and that's stood on the site where the Dreyer building is now.
Okay.
But it was torn down, quite a number of years ago. It was in pretty bad shape. It was built in 1901 as an effort to expand the campus and make it more attractive to prospective students. And Ballard was made as a girls' dormitory. But then Ankeny Hall burned in 1902 after having been remodeled a couple of times and added to. So that put things back a little bit, and partitions were knocked out of Ballard, and it was made into classrooms. Eventually became a girls' dorm again, but was classrooms for a while until T.D. Foster of Ottumwa endowed Foster Hall, which is now part of the MSAE campus. And it was a science building. And Fairfield Hall was also built about that time to house general classes. And Fairfield Hall stood out just east, northeast of this structure. And actually this structure stands on approximately where Ankeny Hall stood, maybe a little off to one side. So Foster Hall and Fairfield Hall were built about 1904, 1903, I can't remember exactly. And then in 1905, a landscape architect from Des Moines named F.E. Pease, that's
I've heard of that name.
P-E-A-S-E, in 1905, he landscaped the campus, and that's where a lot of the unusual plantings originated from. I think one of the reasons for the variety of plants was so that botany students would have, an outdoor lab to use for identification of different species.
I never knew that.
It's something you hear about every once in a while. Then Carnegie Hall, as I said, was built in 1906 to 7. And that was kind of an interesting story I hadn't been aware of. The president of the Board of Trustees, a Reverend Craig, had been a pastor at a Presbyterian church in Keokuk and had known Andrew Carnegie before he made his millions when he was, he was doing something in Keokuk, building bridges or whatever, and had gone to this church. So this guy had been his pastor. So they approached Carnegie about building a library, and Carnegie says, well, if you match dollar for dollar. Well, Parsons was not in a position to do that, so things went on the back burner until somebody else approached Carnegie later, and he decided, oh yeah, I'll pay for it. So that's how Carnegie Hall happened. And it was a library for many years until during the Roberts era, the present library building was built in the 60s. Then in 1908, a trustee gym was built. That stood, where?
Over by the swimming pool.
Yeah, what used to be this. It's
Right.
not there, right?
No.
No. Trustee gym. And I had a friend, I remember in grade school, I had a friend that lived right across the street, a few houses, and we'd go over like on Saturday morning where they would have had dances and parties in Trustee Gym.
Mhm.
This is in 1960, and there'd be pop machines and bags of potato chips and all this stuff left over. And so we'd go over and eat junk food.
That's pretty early for eating junk food. 60.
Yeah, but when you're in sixth grade, I thought you meant on Saturday morning. That's
No,
pretty
I
early
meant
too.
In
Eh,
the 60s.
Yeah, it's like 1960. But Parsons, they still had parties. They were having parties. They were kind of getting warmed up for later in the 60s, like 66, 67, when everything really broke loose. Anyhow, then in 1911, the Memorial Bible Building was built, and that was what later became Parsons Hall, connected with the cloister arcade that came down last May. In 1912, Broadview, the president's home, was built. That allowed Ewing Hall, or what became Ewing Hall, named after the third president of Parsons, to be used as the music conservatory. And that pretty well takes care of the campus in terms of the historic district.
So there was a lot of construction going on for almost a 10-year period
Mhm.
there, similar to what there is right now, a lot of change.
And then when Roberts came in 54, I believe. I mean, just think this building was less than 50 years old. And Roberts was more interested in turning a profit than in having historically significant buildings. And frankly, probably in 1954, 1960, these buildings were not considered historic. They were considered old-fashioned. And that's one reason this building is in bad shape today, because during the Roberts tenure, there was some deferred maintenance issues. The ground was set for the decay that we see today. And certainly over the years, it hasn't been maintained maybe as it could have been either. But,
And like all things, once it starts going,
yeah,
it's hard to catch
it's
up.
hard to bring it back. So this has not been an overnight issue. This has been a long time in coming. And when you look at the windows, we'll see some of the gaps between the cane in the panels of glass where you can actually see light through the window. So there are lots of maintenance issues to be dealt with here. That's certainly true.
So we'll bring our cameraman downstairs and take a closer look at some things.
Okay, sounds good.
Mark, we're standing by one of the two major windows in the front part of the church, which you have a special name for.
Okay, this is the north transept.
Okay, and this is, boy, how big is this? Do you think?
It's tall. I don't know. It's
3 stories. Go.
yeah, at least 2.5 anyway. Yeah.
And very wide.
Yes, quite. It's probably like 12 feet wide. I'm not a good judge of distance, but that's life. Oh, there are lots of things we can say about this. First of all, this window is in memory of Lewis Baldwin Parsons II, who was a brigadier general in the Civil War, and we have some of his effects in the museum collections at the Carnegie Museum, including buttons from his uniform and his epaulets and his sword, things like that, photographs, his personal collection of books.
Is this person buried in Fairfield?
Boy, I don't know.
Oh, I know we did a cemetery story and looked at a lot of Civil War people. And
I'm guessing he's not.
okay.
Now, another interesting thing to pick up on here is the little panel on the bottom of both windows, actually, that says executed by the Leyendecker Studio. Now, you can't see the word studio on this panel. You can on the other window. My guess is that this sill is new. It houses the heating units, and my guess is that the actual sill of the window is lower inside of that, and some of the original fabric has been covered up in the remodeling that took place in the 60s. Another interesting piece about this window are the feathers on the angels themselves. And I'm no expert in stained glass, but this appears to be the actual ripple in the way the sheet of glass was rolled out. The actual ripple in the glass suggests the barbs in the feather of a wing.
Those are beautiful. I think the sunlight just
Yeah.
came out a little, so maybe our
Kinda-
camera can pick it up.
It kind of comes and goes. And then this amber glass in the background is much brighter in the middle and brighter at the top than it is at the sides. And one side is brighter than the other. It seems like the west side's a little brighter. And who knows if there's been glass that has been replaced so that it doesn't match quite the same or what.
Now, something I'm seeing I never would have noticed except that I'm standing right here, and that's that the face, the head, and the hands and the arms are actually sticking out away like a separate piece.
They are, aren't they? And I hadn't noticed that either. Here again, a stained glass expert like Ron Bovard or Mike Burgraff could tell you what that's all about. That might just be a reinforcing element to protect the glass from cracking, because the hands and face,
Are those painted?
yeah, those are painted, and then the glass is fired in a furnace, and the paint is fused to the glass sheet, whereas everything else is simply just colored glass. And there's a name for the different kinds of rippling and mottled effects that are in the panes of glass themselves. But here again, I'm not an expert, so I don't know what that is.
Well, now I'm going to want to go around and look at all the church windows from the side and see if their figures stick
Yeah.
out like that.
I know at St. Mary's, they're the Knights of Columbus windows that are in those doors. A lot of that's painted glass, but they're small, so you wouldn't have to have that reinforcing element. But I'm just guessing. Now here again, Millard Roberts wanted to get rid of these windows at some point. Now I don't know what he wanted to do with them. I mean,
Because they're religious?
I don't know. He severed ties with the Presbyterian Church around 1965, so that this was an independent school rather than a church-related school. The idea being that he could raise more money as a secular institution than as a religiously affiliated one. I mean, that's what they say. Who knows? That's not the wrath of God. It's just the wind. If
You can hear it.
It
You can
sounds.
feel it.
Yeah,
in
it's
here.
noisy in here. Where were we? Yeah, I don't know what his plans were, but I can vaguely remember the controversy about the windows being taken out from when I was a kid. Parts of the windows may have been replaced, and maybe the faces and hands are from the original windows, and other parts here are replacements. I mean, I don't know.
Well, it will be interesting when they are taken down. Ron
Yeah.
Bovard will be able to tell us.
Yeah, And when we look at the other window, we can see how some of the came, the lead strips that hold the panes together, is actually separating, and you can see light in the cracks. So these windows are in desperate need of restoration.
Now, we can look back behind us. There's this nice little area. Does this have a special name?
It's the, I think it's the side aisle. This is the old basilica construction of a church from the Roman times. It was adapted from the Roman public buildings, where you had a central aisle and then two side aisles. And that's what we have right here, are the two small side aisles with the main, flanking the main, the nave of the church.
Now, a lot of remodeling was done in 1966, you said? Somewhere around in there.
So these are not the original pews, and heaven only knows what happened to those. We have an original pew, or a section of one, from Ankeny Hall, from that chapel, up in the museum at the Carnegie Building.
I imagine they were a lot more ornate and
Yes,
typical
I'm
of
sure
this
they were.
building style.
And I'm guessing the chandeliers in here are not original either, although they're pretty compatible with the structure. They have the little fleur-de-lis motif around the top of the the crown of the lighting fixture. But that cylindrical, real simple cylinder has kind of a 1960s look. But they might date back to 1910. I don't know. Certainly these windows, I don't know if I mentioned that or not, the windows may be a little newer than the church itself.
Now, how would we find out about those light fixtures if they were original? Where would we go to find out?
Talk to a historian. There might be, like the historical places might have an archive of religious supply catalogs, or just lighting fixture catalogs where you could date it from that. And maybe the material, maybe that's plastic in there and not glass.
I know that you've dated a lot of things working on the Loudon project.
And you can tell stylistically. Now, a funny thing, the other day, Mr. Anderson, Clarence Anderson, called me and wanted me to come out to the Salina Presbyterian Church and look at it. And I'd never been out there. And as we drove towards Salina, I could see it in the distance, and the little cupola on it, I thought, oh my gosh, it's an 1850s building. Well, I got up to it, it's a 1922 building, but the little cupola looked like an 1850s era cupola. So
Copy. So it's hard
so it was a revival style.
Right. Well, let's give our cameraman a little break, and we'll look at the other window.
Okay.
We're taking a look at the second large window.
Yeah, this is of the rich young ruler, as referenced in the Gospel of Mark, and he may be in another gospel too, I don't know. One thing we want to talk about that we forgot on the other side of the room, the central, in the center of the sill on the other side, had a plaque that was dedicated to the president of the first graduating class of 1880, Ralph Waldo Bickford, and he must have been more to his story than just the fact that he was the first graduating president. Maybe he gave some money or something, you never know. But there's all these little stories that we may never know about. But here we have a plaque that's presented by the class of 1910. The other side too, I think there were plaques dedicated to Parsons presidents. And the middle plaque here is to the parents of of General Parsons. And they're very difficult to read because they're dirty, and we won't tell you what they're dirty from, and tarnished. And then there's a third plaque down on the other end. But these things will all be hopefully be saved before the chapel comes down.
And we were interested again, and I was noticing that on this window, some of the faces are recessed rather than out, although some of them are sticking out a little.
Yeah, the portrait of Jesus and the rich young ruler, and these are this is based on a famous painting. I can't remember the guy's name. I should know what it is. But anyway, he was a famous religious painter from the late 1800s. That particular rendition of Christ's head is pretty famous. And he used that same model over and over. Anyway, those two heads are projecting from the surface of the glass the same way the angels were, but the hands on these two figures have plain glass over them, and they're projecting out the other side. And then you see the two people, the man with the crutch and the beggar woman, their faces, their skin, fleshy parts, whatever, are pushed out from behind with a piece of glass over them. And I'm wondering if that kind of helps give her a more shadowy appearance. They're certainly done in a kind of a gray monochrome, kind of a gray-green, icky, sickly, fleshy, kind of shoved into the shadows kind of color. But here again, a stained glass expert could tell us if there's a particular reason for this.
And this window is in much worse shape than the other, probably because it's on the south and exposed to maybe the sun. And
Yeah, we also hear that little plaque executed by the Leyendecker Studios, Leyendecker.
which, do you have a clue where that is?
I'm sure it could be researched. I mean, for them to do a window like this, they must have been a major studio. And you can see on that central panel where the little Leyendecker label is, how the came is kind of bowed. It sags in the middle. Pieces aren't exactly lined up. It looks like the windows had to actually shift with the building a little bit. On the far end, on the left, we actually have a wide piece of clear tape, like bookbinder's tape, holding some of the window together. That's probably the worst section right in there. Thankfully, the figures themselves appear to be fairly stable, although you can see some light peeking around the ankle of the rich young ruler and around his wrist. So they're in a perilous state right now, and it's good that we'll be saving them.
Yes. And now we're going to take a look at the other foyer, not foyer.
The narthex,
Yes.
where we came in.
Here, the
The side aisle.
The side aisle.
That's right. We had these little medallions with the different symbols of faith in the small windows.
Okay.
So we'll take a look at that now.
Okay.
Okay, here we are at the windows in the side transept. This is the side aisle. Excuse me, I'm getting my terminology mixed up. We have a medallion in each half of this Gothic arch. The one on the left is the crown with the cross, and then the one beside it is simply a crown, symbolizing the lordship of Jesus Christ and his kingship over the world and his triumph over death and all those wonderful symbols that you see in Christian churches everywhere. I've just been informed that there are 38 windows in all in this chapel. Smaller ones like this, as well as the large ones we looked at earlier. Here we have a medallion that has the chalice, referring to the wine of Holy Communion, and on the left of that is the grain of, or sheaf of wheat, or stalk of wheat, I guess, flanked by the grapes. Here again, another reference to communion with the grapes for the wine, the blood of Christ, and the wheat, the body of Christ. He said, "I am the bread of life," and that's the significance of that symbol, or one of the significances of. I mean, you could probably talk an hour.
Just on.
Once you, if you really get into the symbolism of these images, you could just, any one of them, you could go on and on. And then the INRI, and for the life of me, I can't remember what that means. I think it's Greek, like Jesus Christ crucified, or Jesus Christ, Son of God. I can't remember.
I'm sure someone will call us now.
Yep, we'll get hate mail on this one. And then, of course, the crown of thorns, contrasting with the crown of life that we saw in the previous two windows. And here we have the Alpha and the Omega, the Greek letters that are referred to in the book of Revelation. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And then the other little panel is a cross surmounted by an S, certainly. I'm guessing that's a stylized IHS, which is Greek, that means Jesus Christ something. Isn't that terrible? I'm embarrassed I don't know this stuff. But here again, it has symbolism that's relevant to whatever Christian tradition you're from. You see the IHS in churches everywhere. The little cross on the left, it seems like that makes reference to a painting I've seen it's like a stone cross that's being battered by ocean waves.
I was going to say, it looks like ocean waves to me.
Yeah, and my guess is that's a good guess, because on the right we have the anchor, and that was one of the early symbols of the church when when the church had to be underground during the Roman persecution. And the anchor, of course, the top of the anchor looks like a cross. And in the Christian tradition, faith is our anchor in the time of trouble. So hence the storm. And here we have two panels with lilies. Lilies are a symbol of resurrection, certainly at Easter time, and also a symbol of purity. I don't know if the lilies in the vase has any significance or not, in that kind of knife-shaped piece in the background. I mean, that may just be a design element, I don't know. But there might be some obscure symbolism that I'm not aware of. These two windows are not particularly well done, but, they're attractive. You also see St. Joseph with lilies sprouting from his staff. That's also a symbol of his purity. There's also a legend that the Virgin Mary couldn't decide who to marry, and her suitors all stuck their walking sticks in the ground, and St. Joseph's bloomed. And of course, that kind of suggested that maybe he was the one. So that's why you see that symbol with his paintings and statues sometimes. In this one we have the dove, the symbol of the Holy Spirit, but also that he has an olive branch in his beak, so this makes reference to the dove that was sent out by Noah after the flood, and he brought back an olive branch. And that told Noah that the world was coming back to life, and it was probably that he wouldn't sink up to his rear in mud. Things were dry enough that people could safely leave the ark. The next image is one of a censer, and of course incense in the book of Revelation is a symbol of prayers being lifted to heaven. You don't see incense. I mean, I go to the Catholic Church, so I see incense every once in a while. Most churches don't use incense a lot, but it is referenced in the Bible, in the Old Testament, in the worship in the temple and the tabernacle before that, and then certainly, like I said, in the book of Revelation. I can't recall if I said earlier that during the Roberts era that the chapel here was used for Jewish services as well as Protestant and Catholic services. Yeah, we mentioned that, didn't we? Well, if we didn't, we're mentioning it now. And this window is emblematic of that. I mean, certainly the Ten Commandments on the right are held sacred by Jews and Christians alike, and I think even the Muslim faith has a place for Moses in their teachings. And the Holy Bible on the left, of course, is the founding document of the Presbyterian Church, which this was built for, as well as other Christian denominations. And our final window, this is in the south side aisle toward the front of the church. This is the sheaf of wheat. Here again, a reference to communion and Jesus' statement that he is the bread of life. And then on the right, we have a cluster of grapes. Here again, a reference to communion with the Passover wine that Jesus called his blood. And also he referred to himself as the true vine, another reference to the grape. So that's our side aisle windows. We started on the north side and worked our way from west to east, and then we went across the nave to the southeast corner and worked our way west. And that's where we are right now.
Now, if our cameraman can lower the camera, I notice on the pews there are some little plaques.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we could check out and see what those are about.
Yeah,
Looks like each pew is in memory of someone.
Meredith, and in memory of Meredith, and is it Rini Wilson with 2 L's. We have one by John Acker in memory. So my guess is that when they revamped the chapel, that like people do, they gave money for memorial pews to be installed. Yeah, anybody out there have an original pew? We'd like to get a shot of that to see what it looked like.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see what they actually took out. A lot of the doors are, do you think they're original or old?
The doors,
new.
the doors at the back, they don't have a curved edge on that Gothic arch. So my guess is that those doors are newer. Plus, they don't have stained glass windows in them. The hardware, the brass push plate, might be old. I'd have to look at it a little more closely to see if it matched other things in the building. But they just don't. I just have a gut feeling that those are not as old.
So we've been taking you on a tour of Barhydt Chapel. Is there anything else, of significance that we should mention?
Well, let's see. People that saw the Parsons Reminiscence program a couple of weeks ago from this taping, lots of reference was made to Barhydt Chapel, and some of it was sort of not as respectful of a church building as you think one would be back in the 20s and the 30s, putting an outhouse on the roof and putting wagons on top and goofy, prankster things like that. But this was not just a place for the chapel services that were compulsory in the early days of Parsons, but commencement exercises took place here. Pep rallies. I mean, can you imagine having a pep rally in here? But they, in the early days, they didn't have a stadium, so this was basically the school meeting hall where everybody could get together and hear concerts and perform plays. I mean, this was a multi-purpose performance space as well as a place of worship.
I know there are a lot of things in recent years that have taken place. I know St. Mary's had services here on Sundays at 5 p.m. That's been a while. And there are musical performances and concerts.
And I believe the Episcopal congregation here in town used the chapel for a while. St. Gabriel of All Angels Liberal Catholic Church used this before they acquired their present building. And it's still been used for funerals or memorial services anyway for people from the college, university. I still call it the college. That shows how old I am. From the university community, people that have passed away, this has been utilized for memorial services, I know.
And as we walk up front, I think there have been many people that have been married here. I know Dwayne Dooley and Sally Neff and a lot of people.
Yes, and it would be interesting to get a group picture of all those people in front of it before it goes, but I think that's going to be out of the question. But yeah, this place has a lot of memories for a lot of people, and I guess my main memory of it was as a little boy growing up on the farm north of town. I always liked driving past here. Even though it was the back of the church, there's something about that big mass of stone and that green tile roof, and then of course that arched cloistered walkway that connected the chapel with
Yes.
Parsons Hall was very impressive. So just for me, it's just the visual impact on the built environment that's what I'm going to miss the most, I think.
Yes. And behind us, we also should mention the wonderful old pipe organ.
Mm-hmm. I don't know a lot about pipe organs, but
And we taped a show just a few days ago with John Connett, who's going to be taking this one out.
Okay.
And we discovered what a treasure that it is, and we hope to save it for our community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'd pay a pretty penny to buy this new.
Yes.
So it would be nice to keep it in the community as a resource. And in all fairness, I was talking to somebody, they said that the acoustics in here, because this organ was not built for this church, the acoustics are not really appropriate for it, and the organ needs a better place in terms of making best use of the sound that it can generate. So,
I heard
a
the
new
same
home,
thing.
Yeah, a new home would be a good thing for the organ.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Mark, for sharing some of your knowledge about and history about Barhydt Chapel with our community and preserving some memories here and focusing on the architecture. And we will be airing this for our community.
All right. Well, it's always a pleasure to do these shows. I think people take their environment for granted. Things are just there and you don't really look at them. And, as a person that teaches art, that's one thing I try to get my students to do, is to really look at their environment and not just walk past with their eyes glazed over. So hopefully for those of us that have eyes to see in the moments, literally the moments that are left for this building, take a last look and remember, and hopefully fondly so.
Thank you.